Has the Bible been changed? It's quite common for me to hear the accusation that the Bible has been changed, but is there any truth to this claim? There is overwhelming archaeological evidence that the Bible has not been changed, and I'm going to show you some of that evidence in this video. For this video, I'm going to focus on the New Testament, or the Injil, because it's the part of the Bible that records the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ and the events and teachings of the early church. This is a map showing the spread of Christianity, and the areas in red show where Christians were located by the end of the first century. Now, within 50 years of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, the writings of the New Testament, or the Injil, were circulating throughout these areas. Many copies of the New Testament writings were being made and dispersed among Christians in these various locations. By the end of the second century, we have Christians living in all the areas shown in purple. Now you can imagine what a difficult task it would be for someone to change the Bible. Someone would have to gather up all the manuscripts from the Christians in all these locations in order to be able to change the content of the Bible. And by the 4th century, that gets even harder because there were Christians in all the areas shown in green. And these Christians in all these locations were using the writings of the New Testament. So you can see how difficult a task it would be to change the manuscripts in all of these locations. But what if someone tried? What if there was a group of people or an individual who did desperately want to change the Bible, and they did gather up the manuscripts? Let's give an example scenario. Now, this did not happen, but just for the sake of the evidence, imagine that someone powerful, like the Pope in Rome, for example, decided he wanted to change the Bible. Well, let's say it happened in the 8th century, and the Pope gathered up all the manuscripts he could, and he had a lot of power, so he was able to get manuscripts from all these locations. Well, and then change the Bible to say what he wanted it to say. Now, if that had happened, then if we happen to discover a manuscript that he missed, maybe a manuscript that was hiding away, then if we later discovered that manuscript, we would be able to prove that the Bible had been changed, right? Well, let's start by looking at a 9th century manuscript. This is a copy of a portion of the Codex Sinaiticus, a 9th century Greek manuscript. And I've chosen a well-known passage from the book of John. Highlighted in blue is John 3:16, which says, translated from the Greek, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life." Now, this is a 9th century manuscript, and we have many manuscripts from the 9th century. But if someone had changed the Bible in the 8th century, then if we happened to discover a manuscript from the 4th century, then we could prove that the Bible had been changed, right? Well, we have discovered manuscripts from the 4th century, 48 of them. And I'm going to show you one of those manuscripts. It's called the Codex Sinaiticus. Now, this is going to be a little bit hard to see, but if you want to take a closer look, I'm putting the link to this manuscript on my website so that you can look at the manuscript for yourself. Now, this is a 4th century manuscript, and most of the 4th century manuscripts got worn out and they no longer exist. But this one happened to be preserved at St. Catherine's Monastery at Mount Sinai, and it was only discovered in 1859. And since it's a 4th century manuscript that wasn't discovered until 1859, that means there's a 1,500 year time span between when it was written and when it was discovered. So in that 1,500 years, had the Bible been changed? Well, let's see. The same passage from the book of John, highlighted in blue, says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life." Wow! This is the exact same wording in Greek as the manuscript from the 9th century. There is no difference between these manuscripts. But what if the Bible was changed before the 4th century? What if the Bible was changed in the 3rd century? Well, if the Bible was changed in the 3rd century, then if we happen to find a manuscript from the 2nd century, then we could prove that the Bible had been changed, right? Well, we have found manuscripts from the 2nd century, 12 of them. And I'm going to show you a portion from one of them. It's called P66, Papyrus 66. And this was discovered at Jebel Abu Mana near Dishna, Egypt. So this was written between 175 and 200 AD. And it wasn't discovered until 1952, which means that there's about a 1,800 year time span between when it was written and when it was discovered. So in that 1,800 years, has the Bible been changed? Well, let's see. Same passage from the book of John. "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life." This 2nd century Greek manuscript is the exact same wording as this 4th century Greek manuscript. There's no difference between them. The Bible has not been changed. Now, I've only shown you 3 portions from Greek manuscripts. But did you know that we have over 5,800 Greek manuscripts to analyze and compare? Not only do we have those Greek manuscripts, which is the language that the New Testament was first written in, but we also have early translations of the New Testament. By the 2nd century, the New Testament had been translated into Syriac and Latin, and in centuries after that, in other languages. So we have thousands of manuscripts that are early translations of the New Testament that we can also analyze and compare. We have 10,000 manuscripts in Latin. Now, with all of these thousands of manuscripts that we have available to analyze and compare, are these manuscripts exactly the same in all places? No, they're not exactly the same. There are variations in these manuscripts. But if you think about it, it's quite astounding that with the great time span between these manuscripts, over 1,000 years, and the fact that they were written and copied in many different places in the world, it's astounding how they have preserved the meaning and the writings of the New Testament. Now, there's a handful of variations in the manuscripts that make meaningful differences between them. But if we just took that handful of passages where there are meaningful differences between the manuscripts and we tossed them out of the Bible completely, just deleted them, it would make absolutely no difference in Christian beliefs, in Christian ideas about Jesus, or in Christian practice or teachings. There would be no change to the Christian faith if we just completely deleted those passages that had variations. But what most modern Bibles have done is just put a footnote in the Bible where there are differences in manuscripts so that you can be aware of them. So those are the meaningful differences. But there are many more variations in the manuscripts that are much smaller. Thousands of variations between these manuscripts, actually. Now, you have to remember that these are handwritten documents and humans make errors when they're copying things. So the vast majority of the variations between these manuscripts are copy errors. Then there are other variations like spelling variations, differences in spelling and locations, names of locations, and in people's names. So those account for the vast majority of the variations within these manuscripts. But I want to give you one final evidence that the Bible has not been changed, and that is from the writings of the early church fathers. You see, by the 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century, we have writings of the church fathers that quote the New Testament extensively. So remember how we talked about if somebody wanted to change the content of the Bible, they would have to gather up all the existing manuscripts in order to change them. Well, not only would they have to gather up all the New Testament manuscripts, they would also have to track down all the church fathers, track down their writings, and track down the copies of their writings that were made. And that would be a monumental task. You see, those church fathers, such as Polycarp, Ignatius, Origen, Clement, Justin Martyr, Tertullian, and many more, they were writing commentaries on the New Testament. And within those commentaries, they were quoting the New Testament. So much so that we could reconstruct the New Testament entirely just from their quotations. So all of the writings of the church fathers would have to be destroyed as well if somebody wanted to change the Bible. The Bible has not been changed. And I've given you some basic evidences, but there's much more evidence out there if you want to research the topic. I've included the sources for my information on my channel page that will prove helpful if you want to take a deeper look into this topic. Thanks for watching.